Hey, Ed here, Ed the Engineer, and we are in Reason 8, which I got for Christmas 2014, woohoo. Having used Reason Essentials for a while, I thought it was time to make the jump, not least because I got a load of very nice synthesizers added, rack extensions, about 7 or 8 I think. One of which is the Korg PolySix, which is a emulator of the old I don't know when, 1980s. It must have been early 1980s when I used to, how old does that make me? You work it out. Korg PolySix. One of the first, certainly one of the first I used polyphonic synthesizers, back, as I say, in the early 1980s. I've never bought a rack extension. A lot of people have complaints about Reason that it doesn't use or can't use standard VST plugins. I don't particularly have a problem with that because I like to model everything I use from scratch anyway, and Reason's available kit is just more than enough to model most of the sounds that I want to look at. So I've never really used a plugin before in Reason or a rack extension, but I can see the attraction of these. It's €40. I think it's probably well worth that for somebody who just wants to have straight in the rack an emulator of an old classic synthesizer that they want the sound of, or they perhaps have been used to using back in the day. It makes the job a lot easier. As I say, I do model things like this particularly in Subtractor in Reason, but even the Subtractor has a lot more capabilities than the plug-in for the Korg PolySix here, and it's not set out in the same way that the old piece of hardware was set out, so there is some effort in doing that. So I think €40 is a perfectly reasonable price to pay if that's what you are looking for and want to get it quickly. I'll go through what it can do probably in a few videos, but essentially what you're doing in having these rack extension or any old VST plugin really is restricting yourself to the capabilities that the hardware had at the time, because that sets the sound, if you like. The sound is restricted by the capabilities of the machines back then. We can do a lot more with the very cheap synthesizers that are available free in Reason, or indeed Reason Essentials, but because the machines that we've got now can do much more, you have to consciously restrict yourself to what these could do. So this emulator essentially produces the sounds from the 80s by just making available the options that you had back then. We're going to start off looking at the oscillators, the VCO, voltage control oscillator, I think that stands for. It's a straightforward oscillator. There are a few options, 3 options available for the standard audio oscillator. We can start with a sawtooth. I have an oscilloscope down here so we can see the wave patterns. Let me take this vibrato off, don't know why that's on. So a standard sawtooth wave, I've got 4 cycles within the width of that scope trace. If I play the octave below, that's half the frequency, so 2 cycles instead of 4. The octave above, 8 cycles instead of 4. So a standard sawtooth wave. The other options available to me are a pulse wave, which is a square wave essentially, That's a square wave with even highs and low, or equal time spent high and low. A square wave or pulse wave. I can change the pulse width, so the high pulse width is made larger till it's purely high. As you can see on the scope down the bottom there, I'm varying the time that the pulse stays high in that waveform. If I change it to the third available pulse wave modulation setting, again I'll have a pulse wave, but I will be able to modulate that over time with a low frequency oscillator, which is this, the speed of which is set here. So if I add pulse width modulation, you can see that the width is being modulated, so the low so what I'm doing is changing the pulse width over time, and that's regulated by this oscillator here. So the higher this is set, the faster that wave is modulated. So they're the three main settings of the oscillator. If I take it back to a sawtooth, I can add in additional oscillators, sub-oscillators, but they are restricted to being an octave or 2 octaves below. So I can have that, and then I can add an octave below, or I can add 2 octaves below. So again, if you compare that with the subtractor in Reason, I can add a second oscillator, and I can change the frequency of that relative to the first oscillator to almost anything I like. Here I'm restricted to adding it at 1 octave below or 2 octaves below. So there's a straightforward example of how much more restricted this is to what's available in Reason or Reason Essentials. Which is why, you know, it's necessary to do that, because that's what the old hardware synthesizer had. So to emulate that, you've got to get the sounds that you used to get from those machines, you've got to restrict yourself to the sounds that were available. Just looking at this oscillator, I can change the octave, so I can double the frequency by going from an 8-foot to a 4-foot, or half the frequency to the C below by going to the 16-foot. And the 4-foot, 8-foot and 16-foot are hark back to the old pipe organ days, where you had a 4-foot pipe, an 8-foot pipe and a 16-foot pipe. The longer the pipe, the lower the frequency, the deeper the tone. So I don't know that designation is used much on modern synthesizers. It might be actually, but certainly they hark back to the pipe organ days. So a 16-foot, 8-foot and 4-foot stops on an organ are bring in the pipes, and therefore the lower frequencies. So that gives me a range of frequencies available. The vibrato unit will vary the frequency with, again, a low frequency oscillation, so a frequency of oscillation below the audible range, so maybe every second 1 hertz. Sorry, that is the amplitude of the vibrato. The frequency of that is controlled by this low frequency oscillator here, which we'll come on to talk about in the next video. But if you just, I can change the frequency of that oscillation of that vibrato by changing the LFO oscillator frequency here. So this is the LFO, or they call it here the MG, which is the modulation generator, I would guess. But it's essentially a low-frequency oscillator. More about that in the next video. Thank you for watching. I'm Ed, the engineer. Subscribe if you're interested in following further videos on this or synthesis generally, or general engineering videos, which I plan to do. Tell your mates. Just leave me a note down below if you want me to cover any particular aspect of anything really, audio engineering or engineering maths even, or just let me know and I'll see if I can do a video on it. I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching.